Hi, good evening, everyone. We're going to start in just another minute while we wait for some more participants to join us this evening. All right, good evening. I want to welcome you to tonight's virtual parlor chat. My name is Shiloh Holly, and I'm the Executive Director at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. I'm so delighted to welcome visual artist Andrea Arroyo and Northern Manhattan Art Alliance Executive Director Niria Leyva-Gutierrez to join me in a conversation tonight about Andrea's public art piece, CoVIDA, Homage to the Victims of the Pandemic, which is currently on view outside of the Morris-Jumel Mansion until the end of the year. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping measures for this program and briefly share some background about the museum, our work, and our connection to the artist and the installation. First, some housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. So when you automatically join this session, your video and audio will be automatically turned off. And by remaining in this meeting and webinar, you are granting your consent to be recorded. Note, if you choose to speak in the Q&A or to be unmuted, you will be recorded. Next slide. If you wish to interact with tonight's presenters, please use the chat or the Q&A function or raise your hand to be called on. Tonight's moderators will compile questions throughout the program to be answered. Next slide, please. The Morris-Jumel Mansion is a 255-year-old structure located in Washington Heights neighborhood in northern Manhattan. The house is sited on traditional homelands of the Lenape people, and this historic place and its former inhabitants have witnessed and withstood other national trials and tragedies for centuries, ranging from displacement, wars, financial crashes, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and the present-day COVID-19 pandemic. The grounds of the Morris-Jumel Mansion, which formerly comprised 130 acres, roughly 10 city blocks river to river, is a fitting place to display CoVIDA, homage to the victims of the pandemic, as each testify to the resilience of the people of New York City to survive and surmount tragedy and sorrow. Next slide. As a museum and cultural resource, we wanted to find a way to show the impact of the pandemic on our neighbors and the city and create a safe opportunity for community engagement, as well as a space for reflection and intersectional conversations. The artist, Andrea Arroyo, whose work already speaks to this, was a natural collaborator on this project. As of this week, our neighborhood of Washington Heights and Inwood continue to have the highest rate of COVID-19 infections in all of Manhattan, with the zip code 10040 currently having the second highest infection rate in all of the 5 boroughs. As our New York City public schools close once again to try to prevent the spread of this disease, it is a fitting time to have a conversation with you, Andrea and Niria, about the impact of COVID-19 in our lives, in our neighborhoods, and how art can respond and foster dialogues. I would like to introduce my cultural colleague, Niria Leyva-Gutierrez, who will be in conversation with the artist during tonight's program. Niria earned her bachelor's in art history and Spanish literature from Tufts University and a PhD in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. She is a published scholar in the field of Spanish and Latin American art, has served as a curator and a museum advisor around the country, and as an art history professor for 20 years, and was an art history professor for 20 years before joining Noma in 2020, where she currently serves as the executive director. Niria, we welcome you to tonight's program.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone. Shiloh and Megan, it is an honor to be here tonight. in partnership with the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And as Shiloh mentioned, I am the executive director of NoMAA. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with us, we are an arts service organization that since 2007 has had as its mission to support artists, emergent and established, and arts organizations in Upper Manhattan. And it is especially a privilege to be part of this program tonight, since NoMAA has a long-standing relationship with the extraordinary Andrea Arroyo, the artist responsible for this timely and moving and beautiful installation that Morris-Jumel has made possible. And I'm so happy to be here to introduce her. Born in Mexico City and based in New York City, Andrea is a self-taught artist and award-winning curator and activist, working in drawing, painting, sculpture, site-specific installations, and public art. Her work, which examines social justice themes with a special focus on their impact on women, is widely exhibited around the globe, including in places such as the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, the New York Public Library, the Latin Recording Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Ellis Island Foundation, the Richmond Museum, and the National Museum of Mexican Art. She is a recipient of numerous prizes, honors, and grants from a variety of institutions and entities, including New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, the Clinton Global Initiative, the U.S. Department of State, NoMAA, the Puffin Foundation and the Harlem Arts Alliance, the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And I should mention that for 10 plus years, she has served as the curator of the Women in the Heights exhibition for NoMAA. She has also been awarded Outstanding Women of New York, Groundbreaking Latina in the Arts, and Outstanding Latina of the Year. Her public works have appeared in New York City schools and children's clinics, and also in the International Museum of Women, the Elizabeth Cady Stanton Museum, the Morris-Jumel Mansion, and so many other places and media outlets like the New York Times, and the International Herald Tribune. I could go on, but you are here tonight to hear from her. And so I would like to turn to this wonderful installation, and we have a short video. If we could cue that up. This is a work born out of its time. It speaks to us individually, it speaks to us collectively, and it so beautifully taps into how we are feeling right now. This is a piece for the here and now. It's connecting with this moment. And so it's not only a contribution to Upper Manhattan, but it's one that transcends the local and it captures something universal. And so I would like to turn the mic over to the creative force behind it, who will take us through this project. And I'm going to start with a question, Andrea. Tell us about this evocative and brilliant title, CoVIDA. Tell us what this means, how you arrived at this title, how it serves as a backdrop for this work. Andrea, it's a pleasure to introduce you tonight.
Thank you so much, Niria, and thank you, Shiloh. Welcome, everybody. Yes, CoVIDA. So CoVIDA combines the words COVID with vida in Spanish, which means life. And as everyone else, I had been in lockdown for months and was really devastated, but I didn't want to focus on numbers. I really wanted to honor the lives of those who were lost, not focus on their deaths. And I thought the best way to honor our loved ones would be to celebrate the life that we live here and now. And I also knew the pandemic will be part of our lives for a long time. And I was asking myself, how can we live our lives during COVID? How can we coexist with COVID? And I said, this is our CoVIDA, it's our co-life. We are coexisting with each other. We are coexisting with COVID. And I just thought we need to focus on both the devastating loss of life, yes, but also celebrate the life that we have here and now. So that's why I named it CoVIDA. The video we're looking at shows the project on site and some of the process as well. You can see how I'm installing some of the ribbons. I have been working on site-specific work for a long time, and I love these collaborations. CoVIDA is not only a collaboration with the mansion and the park, but also with the community. So far, we have included around 500 names from people in the community and also from people all over the country and as far away as from Mexico and France and Turkey. So that's a big collaboration that turns to be a global action. For me, the project really honors the people who have died, but also I want to acknowledge the resilience of our community. And at the same time, just not forget that the first responders are working up to this day to keep us safe. So I wanted to recognize the courage of the essential workers as well. The piece itself is inspired by a range of memorials from around the world. And the winged figures that you see on the fence represent freedom and care. The silhouette of the cityscapes represents the healing of the city that we so much love and want to just heal. The flowers and the ribbons are in yellow, which is yellow and orange, which are the colors used for Day of the Dead altars and other memorials from around the world. And the ribbons themselves evoke, for me, Tibetan prayer flags, wish trees, and memorial ribbons at funerals. Today, unfortunately, the US just passed 250,000 deaths from the pandemic. So I think just taking a breath and just remembering that is still happening and the devastating loss of life is super important. The pandemic has really impacted all of us in many ways, and we have been isolated for a long time, and we haven't been able to grieve as a community. So I thought it was a very important contribution to provide a space for the community to gather and to grieve, and just a space for reflection. Working on the piece itself has been a really intense process, and one that has been healing for me. And I hope that it provides healing for the community as well.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that. I'm so interested in hearing a little bit about your process and also your work in this space. And sort of, as you mentioned before, working in these sort of site-specific spaces is really a part of your extensive body of work. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with working with different spaces and historic houses, and how this particular historic house informed your process and really kind of led you to sort of how you manifested this project?
Yes, thank you, Niria. So this is actually a project that I did with the mansion before. It was for my exhibition, Women Unbound. And it's a public art installation integrated with the balcony of the home. It's a historical facade, and I call this Eliza's home. And I was thinking of not only Eliza, who owned the house, but also all of the women who passed through the house, who worked and lived in the house, and at the same time thinking of the place where the house is sitting. So this was the Lenape Nation before the house was built, of course. And I was just thinking of connecting all of those women with the women of the community today. So next slide. Thank you. So this is also something that I've been doing a lot. I've been working with integrating my work with historical and architectural features. This was for my exhibition Memories Interlaced at the Shabbat Center, which is at the Audubon Ballroom here in New York City. Next. And this is the first piece that I made for my exhibition at the Morris-Jumel mansion. It's a mixed media integrated with a Napoleonic clock base from the collection of the Morris-Jumel mansion. And when I found this clock base in the collection, holding it in my hands with gloves, of course, just being super careful, I was so deeply moved. It's such a privilege to connect with history in such an intimate way, and just trying to work super carefully and mindfully to respect and to honor not only the location, the place, the community, the objects themselves, the artifacts, but also displaying them in a way that honors the house itself. So it's for me a way to make a connection between the old and the new, the past and the present. Next. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is titled The Journey, and it's from the same exhibition. It's a jewelry box from the 1800s, and it's a watercolor on paper integrated with the box. And as I was working on this, I was thinking, it's a jewelry box. I was thinking of journeys, and the journeys that Eliza Jumel made back and forth to Europe and New York. And I was thinking of our own journeys. I'm an immigrant myself. The community has a lot of immigrants. And any journey that anybody takes, we need to make a decision and just to know what we're taking with us, what's important to us, what can we bring, and what the journey means and how we change during the journey. So just looking at this box, I was just fascinated, and there's such mystery in these artifacts. Next. This is a piece that is integrated with a trivet. It's iron, and from the kitchen of the mansion. And I call it Vesta, and she's the Roman goddess of the home. And again, I was thinking of the women in the mansion, the ones who live there, the ones who work there, the cooks, and the people who serve the owners. And just thinking of how important home is. It doesn't matter where you are. If this is your home where you were born in, if you had to flee someplace, or you're a refugee, or you can come here by choice. I think I was thinking of all of that and how women represent home in so many different ways. Next slide, please. This is, I call this Unlocked Heart. And again, it's another piece from the collection of the mansion. It's American, from the 19th century. And it's a trunk with a sweet little key that it has a heart in it. So I was working on this, and again, thinking of boxes and how we store things, how we bring things, how we travel with different things. I also, when I was working with this, I was very, very mindful of working in a no impact way, in a way that the artifacts are completely respected, honored, and not impacted in any way whatsoever. So you can see the pieces, they look like they're integrated, but they're really not touching the artifact itself. So I am very, very respectful of the pieces that I work with. Next slide, please. This is another piece that I did on a facade. This is the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House, which is a museum in Seneca Falls. Of course, the first women's rights conventions took place there. And I was invited to have a show there that I titled The Center of the Rebellion. And it was both an indoor and an outdoor show, again, integrating the historical artifacts and the facade. This piece is called Winds of Change, just thinking of the women there that were working on getting the suffrage for women. Next slide, please. This is inside the house, again, the Elizabeth Cady Stanton Museum. I call this piece Pearls of Wisdom, and it's mixed media and pearls integrated with a bed frame. And again, I was in the bedroom of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. It was so moving to think, you know, the floors are original. And just thinking that we can walk on the same places that many other people walked before us, and how, you know, lives continue and life continues and changes, and, you know, we make progress and we don't make progress sometimes, but how we live our lives so intensely, and the privilege of connecting in a way that is so intimate was very important to me. Next. Thank you. This I call Women at the Table, again, talking about women's power, empowerment, and suffrage. And sometimes, because there are historical venues and artifacts, it's not easy to find a way to display contemporary art, so we have to be creative. Sometimes it's just placing an artwork on a piece of furniture, like in this case, it's just a dining table where I placed a sculpture that is made of paper, cut paper, ink, and an acrylic, and then on the mantle as well. Next. This is, I call the Cradle of the Revolution, is in the children's bedroom in the house of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And again, I was just so moved when I looked at that crib, and just holding it was just so beautiful to make that connection. Next. Just going to the outdoor work that I do, this is showing me for scale. I've been doing a lot of collaborations with different organizations around the city to do outside work that is integrating elements of nature. And also super important to me to bring work out of the gallery and museum spaces into the public realm. Next. This is in Friendship Garden. I call this Evidence of Movement, and it's a piece that I integrated into an existing fence. Again, I'm always very, very mindful of both nature and of using no impact methods that, the pieces can be installed relatively easily and they won't damage any of the existing features. Next. This is titled Daphne, and it was a piece that I did for the Sherman Creek Park in New York. And it's repurposed materials. It was there for a couple of months, and it was received really well by the community. And it's mixed media integrated with a magnolia tree. I call this one of my collaborations with nature. So this is my collaboration with the magnolia tree. Next. Just to show a little bit of my public art that is permanent. This is one of a sample of that. Is Gun Hill Road Station on the subway. You can see it if you are a neighbor here in New York City. And it's faceted glass. It's a series of panels. This is just a fraction of the whole project. And it sits on the platform of the train. It's an elevated platform. Next. And I think this is our cue to take maybe a couple of questions.
Andrea, thank you so much for that. I have a question. One of the things I'm always struck by with your art is sort of the continuity of dialogue with the past and the present, right? There's nothing static about art. It's not like, you enter one period and it's like a room and you enter in and you walk out and you shut the door and you go into another. It's we are sort of all sharing time and space, and there's always a continuity and a transmission of ideas and reflections. And so there's so much of that in your art and in your respect for the past, and yet your willingness to dialogue with it has always really moved me. And speaking of this idea of movement, there is so much of that in your work. And I know that in your own background as a dancer, this is something that's also contributed to your art. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how it informs your pieces? And this question of sort of, breaking down these kind of fixed chronological kind of boxes that I think sometimes we tend to create?
Yes. So yes, I was trained as a dancer, and I always have a fascination with the female form. It's just I adore the female form, in any, in dance, in art, in real life. And I always think of women as such. We have to be flexible. We have to be. We have to move with the times. We have to be resourceful, and there's no being static in women's lives, past or present. We always have to navigate different situations, circumstances, and we have to just keep moving. And that for me is something that is very, very present in my work, not only in terms of form, but also in content.
Yeah, no, I think that's so fascinating. And also, one of the other aspects, of course, to this work and in general, and there have been lots of comments of people who have seen your work and have really felt that sort of living, breathing quality that you bring to it, the sort of powerful aspects and that kind of engagement. And speaking of that, and I think in part, it's why this project resonates so deeply, this notion of memorialization. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I know this is a theme that you have actually threaded throughout a lot of your projects, how we memorialize those who have passed. And it's fascinating to me because, of course, in the last, I don't know, 35 years or so, our country has really shifted in the way that we memorialize people, sort of from going from these kind of very representational kind of works to really thinking about identity and placing names and saying names. We think of Maya Lin, for example, the Veterans Memorial, or we think of 9/11, how we speak the names of those who have passed. And so, your projects kind of really delve deep into those individual pieces that I think we all connect with, and yet within these very big universals, which is sort of grief and passing and how we commemorate our dead. And you talked about the marigolds, right, from Dia de los Muertos and in Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about that in relation to this project, and then also in relation to the other projects that you've done that have also dealt with this issue?
Yes, may we have the next slide, please? So, yes, I have been really working with addressing social justice issues for a long time, especially women's issues and violence against women specifically, including femicide and forced disappearances. And doing the memorialization for me is about focusing on the person rather than on the circumstance, focusing on the life of the person rather than on how they died. So, for example, this is a piece that I did for the Frida Kahlo exhibition at the New York Botanic Garden, and I call it Viva La Vida. And who is more of an example than Frida Kahlo of someone living life both with pain and joy at the same time? So I think about that a lot, like how when we are in our saddest spaces, we also need to find joy, because those things can live together in our lives at the same time. Next. Thank you. This piece is titled Flor de Tierra, Homage to the Women of Juarez. In Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, there have been thousands of women disappeared and murdered. And Texas is across the border, shares a border with Mexico. And the piece is acrylic, cut paper, acetate, and is integrated with the architectural features of the lobby of the Dallas Latino Theater, designed by Legorreta. And you can see on the back part of the piece, there are ribbons that I wrote the names of some of the victims of femicide. Because for me, again, every time I work on a subject that is so dark and so painful, I really need to shelter in the love and in the life of each individual person. Because focusing on the numbers, for me, is not helpful. I think honoring each individual person is much more, connects us in our humanity. Next. This is a piece that, interestingly enough, this is something that I totally improvised. I attended a demonstration in New York about the disappearances of 43 Mexican students a few years ago. And on the subway on my way there, I actually improvised and started writing the names of the students on ribbons with a Sharpie. And when I got there, I asked the people who were there at the demonstration to help me write the other names so that I could have 43 names. And I just pinned those ribbons to my coat and just walked around. And it was incredible how people engaged with me in a way that I've never experienced before. The disappearances of Ayotzinapa are an extremely painful and horrible incident that is still hasn't been resolved. But I wanted people who didn't know anything about it to engage and to ask questions. And I found that this piece was very helpful for me to engage with people there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I was, it was in Washington Square Park. I was there for a long time. And this is at night. And I just kept walking around and people kept asking questions. So I didn't think of it at all as a performance or anything of the sort. I really didn't. I just went in and I thought, what can I do? What can I do to focus not on the number? Because people kept saying 43, 43, but I really wanted to focus on the names. Next. So after that, that piece informed my gallery work. So this is a piece that I made for a gallery exhibition, and I wrote the names just carefully and mindfully on the individual ribbons. And I showed this in several exhibitions, and I also brought it to the mothers of the disappeared students. So it was very, very moving for me to see the mothers holding the ribbon with the names of their sons. And just, it was such a privilege and a moving moment for me. Next. And that brings us back to the ribbons on CoVIDA. And just briefly, just writing the ribbons for me is such a meditative process. It's very painful, but I just try to, it's very intense. And I really take my time. I take a breath. I don't do it lightly. And sometimes I cry when I'm doing it. And I think that just the action of writing is healing for me. And honoring that person for, the time that I'm putting the ink and just the ink gliding on the ribbon is just such a privilege and such a connection to life. So that makes me feel alive while I'm doing that, and makes me realize the privilege that we all have while we are here. Next. Yes, so that's me just installing some of the ribbons. It's a very simple way of doing it. The installation has been growing a lot. This was before unveiling. With a few ribbons, I think we had 200 at the time. Right now we have over 500. Next. And again, this is, I think, an unveiling day. And this has grown a lot since then. Next. And that's the final installation. And we're projecting that the piece will be growing and just will be installing more and more ribbons to the sides of the fence. As long as we can write them and people keep sending them, the installation will be growing. Thank you. Next, I think that's the last one of my slides.
Andrea, it's wonderful. You brought up Frida Kahlo, who's such an it's so interesting because in a lot of ways, and not during her time, of course, but in a lot of ways, she's such an artist for our time. She in so many ways she was very forward looking because she was so in touch with her grief and with her joy and sort of marking those moments in her life. And I think that we all sort of there's so many different ways of holding sort of grief in our heart, or of processing grief, or what we do with it. And I've always been really struck by the Day of the Dead celebrations in Mexico, and you sort of mentioned them, and you placed you showed the altar and the marigolds, and this kind of community that ought to exist right after life. How does that figure into your work? Because you really sort of seek out these opportunities for community. And speaking of community, I want to invite everybody to in and maybe to engage in this idea of what grieving means on a personal level and in a sort of a communal level, how we process this, because you know, this is one of these moments where our grief is on view, right? It's not I mean, we're all dealing with our own personal grief, but we understand that there's grief at large, right? We're all we're all in this together, and some of us in more specific ways, but all of us are dealing with this. So that notion of grief in community is so interesting in your work. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe you know, we can have some of that community here and engagement and questions and comments from all of you who are attending, who might want to speak to Andrea about this idea?
Yes. So for me, thank you for asking, Niria. I think, you know, for me, I personally, I need to shelter in something, right? So when I'm in pain, when I'm in grieving, I need to find shelter, and I also need to find a connection to life, because sadness is important. Sadness is difficult, but it also connects us to our life. It connects really, you know, the life that is out there with the life that we have now. So for me, I find shelter in art, and I find shelter in community and in communication and in connecting with other people. So right now we cannot really connect with each other in person, of course, because it's not safe. But I thought of providing a space for reflection for the community where we can engage, even if we're not there at the same time. My piece is there for, you know, if you show up today and I show up tomorrow, I see that as a connection that is existing there. And I see that as a super important thing to have at this moment, because we feel really isolated and there's a lot of loneliness and despair. And I think something like this, a space like this, provides a space for us to connect without having to connect in person.
I want to thank both of you for this wonderful conversation this evening. We have had a few questions come in from the audience. This one's from Francie, who is talking a little bit about your work, Andrea, how your memorial pieces are classic call and response. And her question is, how are you expressing a past and forward-looking consciousness while simultaneously holding up the unique spirit of each person or historical moment?
I think for me, I mean, as an artist, I process this individually through my own, you know, it's informed by my own history, by my own life. So I really process this as an individual. So I am fascinated, and I am in such awe of everyone who passed before us, especially women. So I try to evoke or invoke their strength and their power to today's life. You know, when I think of the mansion and the place where the mansion sits, I try to invoke the strength of the women from the Lenape Nation, the strength of the women from the Harlem Renaissance, and the strength of the women who came fairly recently, you know, from different places around the globe, especially Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. And I try to invoke that strength and imbue that into my pieces, or at least into the inspiration that I use for the pieces.
That's great. And Andrea, I have a question for you. So we've talked a little bit about the dialogue between past and present, but what are you hoping that your work could speak to the future women who are viewers of it?
Well, I think of, you know, every time that I think of the pandemic, and it's interesting because when I was looking at the slides of the boxes that I used, the jewelry box and the different trunks that I used that were in the collection of the mansion and in the collection of the Elizabeth Cady Stanton house, I'm thinking of what, you know, future generations are going to find that we live, right? We have different artifacts and objects, and we leave things behind. And those things have imprinted our energy somehow. It may not be evident, but at least I'd like to think that they do have some kind of an energy, and it is at least, you know, the energy of the people who made the box, the people who use the box. But it also, I think, it goes beyond that. And just as an artist, I just think of that a lot, and about how we can connect the struggles or the challenges of the women of the past with the struggles and challenges of we women today.
Yeah, thank you. Dottie, we see that your hand is up. If you want to communicate in the chat, if you want to be called on to ask a question, we're happy to do it. If you type it out or put it in the Q&A section. So it's up to you. But Andrea, I also wanted to ask if you, since this is a living memorial, is there some point where you feel like the piece is actually finished? Is it once, you know, if we're able to write the name of all the victims, or how does it actually live and grow in your mind?
It's interesting because I think the piece itself is going to dictate that to us. I think I just started the piece, but I think right now it's time for me to listen, kind of listen to the piece or listen to the community. I would really like for the piece to have a longer life, and maybe have some of the ribbons archived in a museum or somewhere. But I really didn't plan it to be a 2-month piece and that will be the end of it. I really think of it as a living memorial, and as such, I think it will be living for a long time, especially while we have the pandemic with us. And after that, I think it's super, super important to archive it, to document it, and to remember and to reflect back. You know, I hopefully in a few years we'll be thinking of this as something that is gone and in the past completely. But I think it's super important to keep reflecting on that and the impact and our actions, and also on how we can actually impact change by taking care of each other, by following precautions, by just being mindful and super caring and just loving each other, basically.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful.